We're back out here at the Big Lake once again, and today it's all about topwater bass fishing and how most anglers get it wrong when it comes to what the best conditions for topwater fishing are. Stick around, we're going to talk all about it. Got him. Oh, that's good too. That's a good one. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to lowbrow fishing, and as spring moves on, those waters all across the country are beginning to warm up, and that means topwater bass fishing is really going to get on a roll. Everybody loves topwater fishing. Now here in South Mississippi, I've actually been topwater fishing since, well, late January and early February, and having a lot of success on it. And I know what you're going to say. You're saying, lowbrow, you live in South Mississippi. You guys have summer, more summer, still summer, and then for a couple of weeks, not summer. And yes, those are pretty much our 4 seasons down here. But our water temperatures this year actually got pretty cold. They were in the upper 40s briefly, but that's actually quite a bit colder than they normally are. So I had to, play with it just a little bit to find what works. But still, I was able to get on a good topwater bite when that water temperature was still in the mid 50s. Because a lot of times, we as anglers are just flat out incorrect about when the best time for topwater bass fishing is. We think, well, in the evening, in the morning, slick, calm conditions. Or we might do a little bit during the day if it's overcast, but the conditions have got to be exactly right. We've got to match everything up with those conditions. Otherwise, don't even bother tying on topwater. It's not going to be very effective. And I'm going to tell you, those myths are wrong. And we're going to discuss just exactly why. We're going to break it down little by little. See, my favorite time for topwater fishing is the exact opposite. Bluebird sky, middle of the day, and I don't care if there's some chop on the water. It all depends on the mood of the bass. They're not going to say, oh, you know what? There's not clouds in the sky. I'm not going to bite topwater. They don't even think about it. If they are in the mood, and if you can find the right, spot of water and the right type of topwater bait to go with it, you can certainly catch topwater bass all day at any point of the day. Now, that's not to say that in the morning and in the evening and when it's cloudy or slick calm, that's not to say you're going to catch or won't catch topwater bass more or less. But what I'm saying is there's really absolutely no real defined window when topwater cuts on and cuts off. It all depends upon the mood of those bass. If they're feeding and you see them busting up, well, that's a real good indication right there that you can catch some good topwater bass right then. However, that's not the only way. I've caught plenty of topwater just by searching around with a topwater bait. Now, what kind of topwater bait am I beginning with? What am I starting with? Well, if I'm just searching an area, if I'm just covering water, we've talked about it before. Something like this Yo-Zuri walking bait or a head and spook. Something like this, a Sexy Dog from Strike King. Something like this walking bait where you can work it fairly fast, make casts, and bring it back to you, and then make another cast and bring it back to you and cover water. It works just as good as any type of crankbait. It works just as good as a chatterbait or a swim jig. If you need something to cover water, well, this will work just fine. Now, the only thing is, I won't use it in super deep water. Now, granted, I don't get a chance to fish super deep water all that often, but there is one lake around here that I do fish quite often that is about 45 or 50 feet deep. And I'm usually not using this as a search bait during the day under that, because a lot of times those bass are just too deep in the summertime here in Mississippi, and they don't even notice this is up there. But on the big lake, under normal regular conditions, when I'm fishing 15, 20 feet of water, then I can use this walking bait and I can cover water, and those bass will let me know, hey, we're in the mood for topwater. And then once I find them, I can actually, well, I can slow this down a little bit as I've done in the past and pick an area apart. Because the great thing about a walking bait is you can fish it in a multiple different ways. You can give it pauses, you can work it fast, or you can work it slow and give it real wide turns, which after I found bass and I know that they're in that area, that's what I like to do. I like to mix it up quite a lot to get those bass to bite things just a little bit differently. Now, if I'm making targeted casts, and say I'm fishing the evening or I'm fishing the morning or I'm fishing slick, calm water, then I'm going to go something like a popper, right? This is what most people think of when they think of your standard topwater fishing. This is the old school stuff. This is what we all remember fishing when they were, when we were kids. Now, something like a Rebel popper is a great choice. This is a Rico popper in the bone color. We've already discussed how much I like bone for topwater. Bone colors and black colors, those are pretty much the most that I use for most of my topwater, with a couple of exceptions, but not many. And the reason is, well, the fish are seeing this thing from underneath. You don't need a whole bunch of checkered patterns and blotchy stuff on the top. The bass will never see that. They'll only see what's underneath and maybe a little bit on the side. So that's why I like these plain bone colors. I just keep it super simple. Anything else in that area is just going to be fluff. Now, another bait that's going to work in those same types of conditions, it doesn't have to be evening and it doesn't have to be morning. It doesn't necessarily have to be cloudy. But if you're looking to make targeted casts in flat, calm water, or, maybe you've got a little bit of overcast skies, instead of using that popper, well, I'm probably going to use something like this Head and Spook. Now, granted, this has got that bone pattern on here, but I'm more interested in the black. The black is basically what those fish are going to be keying off on. Because when you're looking at something up, all you're going to see is the shadow anyway. So most things will look far darker than you think they do from the bass's perspective. And when we're fishing, we always need to make sure that we have the bass's perspective in mind whenever we're doing something. So I'm using the popper for something like slick, calm water, making targeted casts along laydowns and things like that. And we've talked about before how I'll use something like a tail-weighted boy howdy. If we've got a little bit of wind and we've got a little bit of sun, maybe a little bit of cover, well, then I'll go to something like this prop-style boy howdy. A devil's horse will work. A spin rocket will work, Again, this is just a simple white one. That black streak on the back, I'm not even really concerned with, because the bass, unless, the line gets boogered up and the hooks and anything, they'll never even see that. But this right here, again, if I'm making targeted casts with it, I could probably try to cover water with this if I worked it fast enough, but that's not the idea of this bait. Now, if I'm trying to cover water and I've got some chop on the water, but it's a little bit cloudy, right? We've got some overcast skies. Well, then I think of something like, a spinner bait or a swim bait. You're going to use something in the moving bait area. And that's where this Berkeley Chapo or a Whopper Plopper, a plopper style bait, can be very, very effective. If I've got some chop on the water, if I've got the wind at my back, I've got some cloud cover over my head, that's where something like this can be exceptionally effective. A plopper style bait is going to be a great way to cover water, and I will be leaning more on that than I will a normal walking bait. Now, a walking bait can do you just fine. Something like a one knocking spook will do just fine, but in that sort of situation, I want just a little bit more racket, and that's where this Whopper Plopper, that Berkeley Chapo, is going to come into play. Now, I like to do things just a little bit backwards when it comes to a few things. You've got cloudy skies, you've got wind, you've got some waves. Well, a lot of guys are thinking spinnerbait, and rightly so. It's a great time to throw one. However, whenever it comes to wind and waves, I want clear bluebird skies, and I'll be throwing something like this buzzbait. Now, that seems backwards, right? You don't think of a buzzbait whenever you've got a good bit of chop on the water. But if I've got good bit of chop on the water and I've got some good wind working and I've got, fairly sunny to bluebird skies, I'm working a buzzbait. This can be a great bait whenever you've got some chop on the water. And I love it in the wind because you've got that blade right there that can give you just a little bit of extra flash. Now, this is a Strike King KVD, and I don't know if it's called a Buzz Toad or a Toad Buzz or whatever, but All I know is I like it, and it's very, very effective for me. This is a 1/2 ounce variety. And I've got a little Berkeley Pit Boss on here. And if you've never tried to use that as a trailer for a buzzbait, give it a try. They actually look really good in the water, at least to my eye. And I think the bass like them as well, because I've caught quite a few fish doing that. So again, think about the situation that's going on whenever you're picking the topwater bait that you're using. We often think evening time, morning time, slick, calm, cloudy, and that's what we relegate it to. And then we just generally pick willy-nilly whatever topwater we like. But no, I'm telling you, topwater is just like any other type of bass fishing. When it comes to selecting the proper baits, when it comes to selecting the proper tools for the job, you've got to know what's going on around you, because it really does affect how those bass behave. Lastly, well, we've got to talk about these guys, right? A frog. Now, this is going to be the most friendly topwater baits that you can have. They're very forgiving, but the thing about it is they work really well in heavy, heavy cover. If you've got a lot of hydrilla, you've got a lot of milfoil, you've got acres and acres of lily pads and lotus flowers. Well, we all know when to pull out a topwater frog. Now, granted, they say best time for fishing these is when it's fairly calm. And for the most part, that can be. But I fish these whenever there's some chop on the water. And if I'm got a good bit of chop on the water, well, then I'm going to something like a pop-in frog. So rather than having your normal frog here, I'll have a pop-in frog tied on to make just a little bit more noise in those pads, so I can stand out, because you get all that wave crashing, you get all the wind action under the water, and that can be very noisy for those bass, and they have a hard time discerning what your bait is, what you're trying to show above everything else that's going on. And again, very simple color. This is just like a chartreuse color, which anybody can tell you probably looks very white to a bass, because they don't see chartreuse very well. They don't have the rods and cones that we do. They only have 2 rather than 3, and we've talked about that before in other videos. But the point is, don't box yourself in when it comes to fishing topwater. We like to relegate it to very select times, and I'm telling you, you are doing yourself a great disservice whenever you limit topwater bass fishing to just a small segment. It can be good all day. My favorite time and some of the best topwater fishing I've ever had has been right in the heat of the day, right in the middle of the day, in sunny conditions with a lot of wind. And I have been tearing them up on topwater. I let the type of fishing that I'm looking to do, the conditions around me, I let that dictate the type of topwater bait that I'm going to select. If I'm trying to cover water, well, then I'm talking walking baits, buzz baits, ploppers, those types of things that allow me to make good casts and retrieve pretty fast. If I'm making selected targets, if I'm casting at laydowns, I'm casting at timber, well, then I'm using something like a popper, or I'm using something like a boy howdy, something along those lines that I can make those targeted casts and work a smaller area with a little bit more finesse. And it actually really does pay off. So don't be afraid to get out there any time of day and start slinging around topwater. I'm telling you what, you'll be amazed at just how many bass you can catch. So there you have it, throwing topwater baits under any conditions, pretty much any time of day. I get a lot of strange looks out here on the big lake when guys see me throwing spooks or poppers on high noon, but they soon change their tune when they see me catching piles of bass. So think about that. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.